The first ink smudged on the paper as if it were trying to blur what it meant. Marina's hand trembled only once, long enough for the clerk to clear his throat, long enough for Donna Teresa to smile with that careful, practiced satisfaction people wear when they think they've fixed something, and then the signature was there, neat and irreversible. She folded the copy and held it like a small accusation against herself. Around her, the room buzzed with the ordinary murmurs of a bureaucracy. A pen clicked, a door opened, a baby cried in the hallway, but for Marina the sounds were sharp and distant, as if heard through glass. She had come to the registry not by choice. She had come because a handful of numbers on a ledger had become walls around her family's house. Her father's name had been dragged into red ink, a loan contracted in a panic that now gnawed at them like termites. They had argued, pleaded, tried to bargain, tried to. Donna Teresa, with her old, very old friendships and a will like iron, had presented one solution that could be made public, stamped, and final. Marina marrying Gabriel Tavares would wipe the debt clean. It would buy time, silence the whispers at the grocer's, the landlord's letters, the calls from collectors that started at dawn. They called it an arrangement. Marina called it a sentence. He stood to her left in the cramped office, a modest figure in a jacket with patches on the elbows that already had character. He did not look at her when she signed. His hands were folded, and the little boy who was his daughter, no, his daughter, clung to his leg, staring up with a seriousness that sometimes belongs to children who have had to grow too quick. Alice's small hand was sticky with a lollipop. When she noticed Marina, she peered at her like she was a new person at school, cataloguing. There was a pause, an almost tender pause, between Marina and the child, as if the universe was considering whether to correct itself. "You don't have to look at me like that," Marina whispered to herself. Her voice kept some of its life, though the edges were dulled by exhaustion. She hadn't imagined marriage like this. She had imagined earning, moving cities, being free to sleep without calculating every bill. She had imagined love as a possibility, not as a ledger entry. The ceremony was short. No music, only the thin voice of an official reading clauses that might as well have been recipes for a life she had not baked. Donna Teresa held Marina's hand at one point, with a squeeze that promised everything and offered nothing. Gabriel said the words that made them husband and wife in the eyes of the law, but he spoke as though humoring a necessary formality. His voice was steady, almost softer than she expected. When they posed for the obligatory photograph, the camera caught something small and immediate. Marina's chin lifted because her body insisted she look dignified. Gabriel's eyes were lowered, guarded. They left the registry with a paperclip binding their names, and a taxi ride to a neighborhood Marina had known only by reputation, rows of houses that leaned toward each other like confessions. It was small. A laundry line sagged in the yard, and a rusting mailbox held the echoes of other lives. Inside, the air smelled of boiled coffee and lemon cleaner. There was a faint mark on the wall where a picture had been removed, and the tiny bed in the corner had a unicorn blanket folded with care. The house was not squalid. It was lived in, stamped with the invisible design of a man who loved a child more than he loved ostentation. Alice opened the door, and the house inhaled with a softness Marina did not expect. The girl's hair smelled faintly of oranges like a market stall. When she was led to her room, Alice chattered about a drawing of their car, the pink car they painted on the paper, and it felt almost obscene, the gentle normalcy of a child's fantasy juxtaposed with the sharpness of Marina's decision. She thought of the faces in her own family, the debt settled, her father's hands no longer trembling with worry. The ledger would close, and maybe her father would laugh again at a joke he had stopped finding funny. Yet the gratitude that should have swelled in her chest was knotted with shame. She could not accept that a signature could mean freedom. Freedom came at too high a price. In the first days, Marina watched and learned the rhythm of the house like someone learning a stranger's heartbeat. Alice woke at 7, insisted on knotting her own shoelaces, and required a breakfast that was always the same. Milk with a slice of toast cut into triangles. Gabriel was a man of small rituals. He made coffee thick and bitter, the kind that clung to the tongue and required at least 1 glass of water after. He lined up Alice's sandwiches with military precision. He checked the locks 3 times before leaving the house and murmured the girl's name to himself, like a litany, as if invoking it could stitch away any danger. When Marina spoke to him, it was clipped at first. She refused to let pity be part of their new language. She took the bus to interviews across town, folding her shoes in plastic bags when it rained, and in the evenings she photocopied resumes at a store that hummed with cheap fluorescent light. She walked into interviews and smiled, as if happiness could be implemented like a suit, because she had to demonstrate a competence that was not about her sacrificed life, but about her capacity to return to a sovereignty of work. At home, the furniture seemed to hold secrets in the threads of the cushions. When they ate together, Gabriel would ask what she wanted in a tone that suggested he was learning how to manage a conversation that used the word future. He was careful with his hands. Once, when Alice scraped her knee chasing a neighbor's dog, Gabriel bent and pressed his lips to the child's forehead with the kind of reverence Marina recognized from stories where heroes knelt before sacred relics. It was both ordinary and extraordinary, and it loosened something rigid inside her. It would have been easy to write tenderness in a single paragraph: heat of coffee, a child's laugh, a hand that lingers on a shoulder. But tenderness uncurls slowly, with small repetitions. Gabriel made a point of taking Alice to the park every Saturday. He would return with her cheeks damp and her shoes muddy, and he would have bought a new crayon box when hers ran out without announcing it. Once he woke Marina in the middle of the night because he could not find Alice's favorite stuffed rabbit. They searched the house with a flashlight like thieves, and when the rabbit was finally found lodged under the couch, the relief that washed over Gabriel's face looked like religion. Through these small things, Marina started to measure him by gestures rather than the ledger that had brought them together. She began to feel something like respect, the steady kind that grows when you see a person holding a life fragile and sacred. Respect, then curiosity. She noticed the way his phone vibrated with calendar reminders and the way he excused himself from conversations without answering. He kept receipts folded into his wallet. Once she saw an envelope addressed to him with a foreign handwriting that made her throat tighten. But when she asked, he brushed it off with a joke about a cousin's birthday. And yet, there were fissures. He refused invitations to family dinners from Donna Teresa that carried the undertone of wanting to watch the arrangement like a spectator at a play. He left early from church services, citing a child's cold, and his face grew far away when certain names came up, names like board or meeting. Marina found stacks of inked papers in a drawer, labeled with dates she could not reconcile with the life they were living. They didn't belong to the world of patched elbows and thrift store lamps. They were meticulous, professional, documents that made no sense in the modest house where Alice's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. "Who are you?" Marina asked one night. The question small at first, and then growing like a flame that warms until it demands air. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her as if trying to rearrange his thoughts into those small words. "I'm the man who has to keep her safe," he said. "That's the part that's true." He did not elaborate. He offered no titles. He explained nothing about the receipts or the envelope. There was a regret in his face that had the weight of a confession, but it was held back, as if some detail could hurt more than the silence. Marina took a job at a small administrative office that paid enough to get by and not much more. Her days were measured in stamped envelopes and the occasional co-worker who offered a sympathetic smile. She became practiced at smiling with her mouth, even when her insides were heavy. She learned the names of everyone in the building and found that identity could be rebuilt in small increments. At night, she would return home and fold Alice's clothes into stacks that smelled faintly of lavender. Sometimes, when the light from the kitchen fell across the linoleum in a golden strip, there would be a moment when the three of them, two parents, one child, sat together, and the proximity felt less like an obligation and more like the possibility of a chosen family. One afternoon, while she was ironing a tiny dress, a woman from the building across the street called up to confess that she had seen a man in a suit stepping into a car with a corporate logo on its door. The neighbor's voice dropped at the word like it was a lit match. Marina's hands stilled over the iron. She asked the woman to describe the car. It was shining, the neighbor said, like it had no dust at all. He looked different. The neighbor laughed, as neighbors do, to hide the curiosity that is both harmless and cruel. That night, Marina found a new incongruity waiting on the kitchen table. A small card for a parking service with a downtown address and a pen with a brand name she couldn't afford. No one had left a note. She arranged the card beside Alice's unicorn cup as if they were companions. The world had rooms she had not seen. She did not ask, not yet. Perhaps she was still practicing the posture of someone who would not be surprised again. Perhaps she was testing whether a life built with such tight, necessary bricks could bear the weight of secrets underneath without collapsing. Or maybe she was saving the question for a time when she would not be so raw and could ask without looking like she was demanding an explanation from a sleeping man. They learned a small choreography of coexistence. She would make the bed, he would pack Alice's lunch. They spoke in practicalities. When Marina applied for a promotion at the office, she caught him standing at the doorway with his jacket half on, watching her. "Do it," he said quietly. "You belong in places that ask for more of you." It was the first time he encouraged her without reserve. She felt the word belong slip into her like a bandage. There were moments when the arrangement felt like real partnership. Once, during a week of rain that turned the street into a ribbon of mud, the washing machine broke. Gabriel gathered damp clothes and set about trying to mend an old machine with a level of patience that bordered on reverence. Marina knelt across from him, fingers blackened with grease, laughing at a joke about their domestic misfortunes. Alice danced around them, hat askew, and in a picture-perfect instant Marina thought, impossibly, that she could imagine this life being chosen rather than assigned. Yet the ledger loomed. She caught herself rolling the events of the day through her mind. The registry, Donna Teresa's smile, the debt paid. Gratitude threaded with the suspicion of complicity. Was she, by staying, allowing a shameful transaction to smooth over into a life? Or was she claiming something for herself, a family maybe, or a future, on her own terms? Outside their small life, the Tavares family moved like a distant storm. There were whispers in the market about relatives of the Tavares, people with better shoes, who had barely acknowledged the marriage. Donna Teresa took the victory of the ledger and paraded it at neighborhood gatherings as if it were a trophy. Marina could feel the weight of their eyes in the grocer's line, the way conversation thinned when she entered a shop. It was humiliating in a public, precise way. She had been reduced to a headline, the woman who had married the poor father to clear his debt. But the man at home was not the caricature. He was more complicated, a protective presence that refused to show his hands. He built a life around a child's safety. He kept secrets the way people hide fragile things inside walls. Marina's anger shifted and mutated, sometimes aimed at Donna Teresa for offering a solution that did not consult her, sometimes lodged like a stone in her chest toward Gabriel for withholding a truth she felt she had a right to know. She could not yet measure which wound would hurt longer. As weeks blurred into a rhythm that looked like permanence, a crack appeared that would not let her rest. It was small, a thing someone else might miss, a leather shoe in the back of the closet, pristine and whispered about, that had not been meant for the days they lived. Marina found a photograph tucked inside an old book of fairy tales. A man in a suit beside a branded sign, smiling with a cluster of people who looked practiced at public joy. The photo's edges were clean, the kind you find in official albums. On the back, written in a hand she did not know, were initials and a date. Her stomach turned when she saw the initials. She had never learned to read in the margins of other people's lives, but suddenly she was fluent in them. That night she made a decision not to confront him in anger, but to watch. She would observe the rhythms and see if they aligned. It was self-preservation, the way a woman might train herself to breathe underwater. The first clue that what she suspected was more than a personal paranoia came by way of sound. A night in late autumn, the house mostly asleep, the child tucked under a blanket like a small island, Marina heard keys that did not belong to this neighborhood. The vehicle he drove home that evening had the hush of something polished. She told herself it was imagination until she opened the door and saw the shape of it in the shadow, sleek lines and paint that reflected the moon like a polished coin. Her heart stumbled in her chest. The car's emblem gleamed, a small, elegant crest that did not belong to any vehicle she had seen going to the market. Gabriel carried with him a different air when he returned. He stepped out of the car with a gait that suggested training, posture practiced in rooms of power. He moved as though he had left one life and returned to another. He smiled at Alice, with the same softness he always wore, but there was precision in his hands now, an economy to his touch. Marina felt as though the floor had rearranged beneath her. "Where did you go?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "For a meeting," he said, watching her face, as if weighing how much of himself to give. "It ran late." "You took her out that day, didn't you?" she said. She had meant to ask something else, about where he worked, about what his days looked like. But the question came out wrapped in accusation, because she could not help herself. The act of signing away her freedom had taught her to speak in barbs as well as in civility. He smiled then, not forced but small and private. "Yes, you were at the interview." An admission like that was a bridge in the dark. It implied a knowledge, not an explanation. Marina shut the door behind him with deliberate slowness, as though if she kept it half open, she could keep the possibility that this was a misunderstanding from evaporating. In the weeks that followed, the signs multiplied in a way that felt like proof, pressing itself into the seams of her life. He left late, returned early, spoke on the phone with a calm that suggested authority. There were references to people whose names carried a weight, Mr. Costa, Miss Rui, and when he sloughed off his jacket, the cufflinks glinted with a small, expensive severity. Once he returned from a weekend away, with his jacket smelling faintly of new leather and the tang of a different city. He was evasive when she pressed, offering only that Alice had needed to see her grandmother, and it had been a quick trip. Her anger, honest and sharp, surfaced then with the force of one wrong after another. She visited Donna Teresa and asked bluntly, "In the tone you use for a wound you mean to diagnose, does he have money?" Donna Teresa's reaction was a twitch of surprise and a drying up of the smile. "What would that matter?" she said. The phrase was meant to pacify, to move the conversation away from facts that might complicate the neat lines of her victory. But it did matter. It mattered because if he had wealth, then the marriage had not been what she had been told. If he had wealth, then the ledger that had forced her hand had been a stage set. If he had wealth, then her signing was not simply a sacrifice, but a calculated architecture of truth and omission. The potential for hurt was not about money. It was about being moved as if she were a pawn on a board where others claimed the right to decide her fate. She began to sleep badly. Dreams arranged themselves in the pattern of accusations. For a time, she woke and did the old calculations. Had she overreacted? Was she being paranoid? Could a life be built on the fragile pillars of silence? She tried, too, to find reasons for him. Perhaps he had been protecting Alice from vultures who would use his wealth to enter and devour. Perhaps there were threats she couldn't imagine. Perhaps his family's history had scars that made him think secrecy was kindness. One morning, returning from the market with a bag of oranges, she found a small envelope slipped under their door. Inside was a slip of paper with a bank reference and a number she did not understand. The handwriting was hurried. No name, no explanation. She traced the figure with her thumb until it felt warm. Beneath it was a half-burnt receipt for a payment to a creditor, one she recognized. Her throat tightened. Someone had already paid something that should have been paid by the ledger. She turned the paper over, looking for a signature, a mark, any clue. There was none. When Gabriel came home that evening, she set the slip on the table. He looked at it as if he had been keeping a small inventory of small miracles. His eyes flicked over the figures and then landed on her face. "You found that," he said. "You knew," she replied. He sat down slowly as if bracing himself. "I didn't—" He stopped. The sentence faltered because it needed to be built properly, the way some truths must be carried out in stages. "I've been trying to make things right for them," he said finally. "Quietly. I didn't want you to feel exposed. And you thought arranging a marriage would be the way to do it." Her voice held the brittle edge of someone who had been sold as a solution. "It wasn't like that," he said. "Not at first." He hesitated, looking for a language that could fit the weight. "I thought if you said yes for them, for your family, for the burden to be lifted, I could give you time. Time to think. Time to decide if you wanted more than what we had." Marina swallowed. The words were an attempt at tenderness, but carried an undertow of strategy. The truth, when it comes slowly, still stings. "You didn't tell me you had options," she said. "You didn't tell me you could choose differently." He reached for her hand. "I thought protecting Alice would mean keeping her out of the spotlight," he murmured. "Her mother is—" He halted. There was a flicker of something in his face that Marina could not name. Shame, fear, a memory of a woman who had lost everything too quickly. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. There were histories he guarded like an heirloom. "You used me," Marina said, and the phrase was not theatrical. It was a simple accounting. "I asked you to help," he said. "I suggested it." "You suggested it," she corrected, because the difference mattered. A suggestion could be refused. A plan that lands like a net across someone's life leaves less room for refusal. He was quiet then, and the child in the other room hummed a television tune without understanding why grown-ups were reshaping the day. Marina sat with the accusation lodged between them like a third person. There was no immediate reconciliation. There was no dramatic confession now, only the slow, brittle unreeling of betrayal. She could see with a painful clarity that the scaffolding of their life had many hidden beams. That night she packed a small bag. It was not dramatic. No loud doors slamming, no public spectacle. She left a note that said she needed time. It felt childish and also necessary. Time was the currency she had been denied, and she would spend it as she chose. She found her way to the narrow bench at the park where people came to feed pigeons and drink takeout coffee. The bench faced the street where cars passed in lights that blurred into a strip of color. She watched a father toss a ball with his son, the sort of ordinary domestic magic that could make resentment fray at the edges. She thought of Alice sleeping in the modest house, of her breath soft and regular, and the knowledge that walking away meant she would be leaving the child she had begun to love. It was not a light choice. Marina did not know yet if she would stay. She only knew she could not let the ledger be the only story of her life. She had given herself up once to numbers and signatures and pressed a pen until the paper held her name like an accusation. She would not sign away truth again. In the dark between moments, she wrestled with the shape of the man who had kept things from her. He had his reasons, and some of them were rooted in care. But care without candor stained whatever it touched. She thought of honesty as an obligation, not a weapon. She wanted a life made of agreements, not arrangements by proxy. A week later, as the sun threw long, forgiving shadows across the street, Marina saw something that made it impossible to pretend ignorance any longer. She was crossing at the corner near the school when a car eased past the light and paused. It was the same car she had glimpsed in the night, only now it sat in full daylight, emblem glittering like a statement. A man in a suit stepped out with the air of someone accustomed to being noticed. People glanced. City life rearranged itself around them for a beat. Marina's first instinct was to look away. Her second was to notice the logo on the door, a crest she had no relation to, and yet one that unlocked a dimension of possibility. Her throat tightened. She recognized him before he saw her, the way he walked, the sight of a child on his hip. Alice's hair shone like a halo in the sunlight. Gabriel's movement was practiced, the sort of ease a man attains when he inhabits rooms that belong to him. He looked up, as if sensing someone in the crowd, and their eyes met across the thin air between them. There was a flash in Gabriel's expression, surprise, then a guarded apology. Marina felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as though some invisible hand had plucked a cord and changed the key of her life. Everything she had been standing on reeled. For a moment, Marina's instincts wanted to meet him with fury, to demand the ledger of his life. But the girl's small face in his arms soothed something raw and immediate. Alice giggled at a pigeon and tucked her chin to hide the sound. Marina put a hand to her mouth to keep from making a noise that would attract attention. She walked away slowly, as if leaving would keep the world from collapsing. She had been forced into a name on paper. Nobody knew the half that would turn their small life inside out. But the secret was no longer secret to her. The machine of danger had been switched on, and what had once looked like an arranged union under a shabby light now had the sheen of something more complicated and far more consequential. She wanted answers. She wanted to be shown why the truth had been kept. She wanted time to decide whether to stay, to ask for more than the pen had given her, transparency, respect, an equal voice in shaping what would come next. For now, she did the only thing she could. She held her dignity like a small, stubborn light and walked home into the house that smelled of lemon cleaner and coffee, and she folded herself into the part of the life that had been given to her, while the other part, sparkling, complicated and suddenly very loud, waited in the dark like a promise she had not yet learned to accept or reject. She watched him disappear into the glass of the building the way you watch a tide go out, hoping foolishly that it might leave something behind. The logo on the facade gleamed the way a crest gleamed on a letter, precise, quiet, official. For a long moment Marina stood on the sidewalk with the bag of oranges heavy in her hand, thinking of the ledger she had left behind, and the signature she had pressed into paper as if it were the only key that could open a door. The key had opened all right, but into a house with rooms she didn't yet know. She did not follow him immediately. There was a small, stubborn part of her that refused to be the woman who chased answers with the clench of humiliation. Pride, or perhaps a need to keep some dignity intact, made her walk in the opposite direction. But the image of his smile at the child, the ease of his gait, and the crest on the door did not leave her. That night, sleep came in thin strips. When she closed her eyes, she saw the car again, the polished paint catching the moonlight like a rumor, and felt the press of unanswered questions up against her ribs. On the third day, after she had left the house with the note, curiosity and a plan that barely passed for courage led her back downtown. She dressed in the plain jacket she had used for interviews, threaded her hair back, and caught a bus that rattled past the places she used to walk to work. At the building, she moved like someone testing a boundary. There were security guards, of course, badges and polite phrases, but thanks to paper and procedure, she was able to slide a driver's license and a marriage certificate across a receptionist's desk and say the sentence she had sworn to avoid: "I'm Gabriel's wife." The receptionist's eyebrows rose, polite, not hostile, and a woman with a neat bun and a nameplate that read Sophia excused herself from a conference call. She led Marina down a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer ink, and then stopped outside a door whose frosted glass held a logo she had already seen in daylight: Tavares & Co.'s. The name was simple enough. On the brass plaque beneath it was Gabriel's full name. Marina's breath hitched so that it sounded like a small private panic. "I'm sorry," she said, as if she were intruding on a private grief. Sophia's expression shifted from professional courtesy to a human, unsettled curiosity. "You are Mrs. Tavares?" she asked. When Marina nodded, the receptionist hesitated, and then quietly, "He hasn't told many people about his family life. He keeps it separate. He prefers it that way." The door she opened led to a lobby of glass and polished stone. The furniture had the spare confidence of places that never forgot themselves. Marina felt like a person who had wandered into a painting and needed to find her feet. There were framed photographs on the wall, Gabriel standing beside men and women with faces used to headlines, beneath plaques commemorating donations, beneath a caption for a community center he had funded. In one photo, someone handed him a plaque, in another a ribbon cutting, smiling, controlled, always slightly larger than life. She wanted to leave right then. She wanted to retreat and keep the dignity of not knowing. But a small envelope on the receptionist's counter had her name in the careful, angular hand she had seen before. Sophia, without a dramatic flourish, put it into her hand. "He's been quiet at home," Sophia said in a tone that suggested she understood too well what it meant to keep two worlds clean. "He asked me to hand this to his family if they ever needed help. He insisted no one else know. She stopped, looking toward the inner offices as if she had seen a private grief. "He worries he made mistakes." Marina's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were pages, a bank statement, a receipt for a transfer with her father's creditor listed, an unsigned note that read simply, in small print, "For the Alcantara family. Do not publicize." There were photocopies of deeds, a document indicating a trust fund in Alice's name, and a scanned email thread showing payments from a corporate account to vendors who had been chasing her family. Her eyes skipped to a line item that made her breath falter: "Loan settlement, account no, redacted, paid in full." Everything she had feared and half hoped for rearranged itself under the light of that fluorescent lobby. She could feel the past weeks unfurl differently. The signature at the registry, Donna Teresa's smile, the bus rides with shoes wrapped in plastic. The ledger she'd thought was the only truth had company, and it had been paid in ways that had nothing to do with the pen she had lifted. Sophia watched Marina with the careful neutrality of someone who had seen too many lives arrive in envelopes. "He asked me to do it," she said. "He said if you ever needed paperwork, you'd take it quietly. He didn't want medals. He wanted things done." Anger rose like a physical thing inside Marina, raw and hot. The envelope trembled between her hands. "What else?" she asked. Her voice sounded small to her ears. Sophia hesitated. "There are appointments, board meetings. He is deeply involved. He donates, he chairs committees, he has offices in other cities. He keeps his life with Alice separate so she can be a child. He pays many things quietly. He thinks it's better this way." Marina left the building with the papers folded in her coat, like contraband, and a fury that felt righteous. It was not the wealth that stung so much as the secrecy. He had helped, she could see that from the receipts. but he had done it with the overhead of arrangement and the shadow of a plan that used her signature as an instrument. This was not because he could not afford to be generous publicly. It was because he had chosen to make her the currency for his protection. When she arrived back at the small house, because arriving back felt like the only possible action, Gabriel was there, rubbing his hands as though he were returning from a long journey. Alice ran to greet him with the unabashed adoration only a 5-year-old could have. The sight lodged pain and tenderness at the same time. Marina set the envelope on the table between them, like an accusation in neat handwriting. He leaned back, fingers curling around a mug he had not drunk from yet. The careful calm he wore in public seemed to pull against the tautness around his eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly. "You said I was his wife," Marina replied. "I used that. I walked into a corporate lobby. I have an envelope with your name on it, which proves what we've all suspected and what you hid." Her words were clean, accurate, and serrated. She had rehearsed 1,000 furies, but now that she stood there, the anger that rose was colder, precise, more like arithmetic than flame. Gabriel's face shifted. Whatever armor he had practiced for meetings slotted out of place. "You found the receipts," he said. He didn't sound like a man making legal arguments. He sounded like a man who had been found with his hand in a hidden pocket. "Why?" Marina asked. "Why would you hide this? Why marry me, or suggest it, if you had the means all along?" He looked at Alice, who had by now curled against his leg, and then back at Marina. "I wanted her safe," he said. "Alice has been through things other people who have enough never see. When her mother left, there were people who smelled opportunity more than sorrow. I had friends who wanted to get close to her because of the things I could give. I thought that if I kept us small, if I stayed in plain clothes and in plain rooms, people wouldn't come looking." "It doesn't justify using me," Marina said. The sentence quivered, full of all the things she had thought. "You orchestrated a life I did not choose. You suggested I sign away my future as if it were a way to buy time. That's not protection. That's decision-making for me without me." He swallowed. "I suggested, I didn't force." His voice broke just enough for her to hear a man who had tried to weigh his wrongs. "But you're right. I didn't tell you I could have solved the debt without that. I thought if you saw the means, you would leave before anything else could begin. Maybe I feared your leaving more than I feared my own duplicity." The air between them hummed with the honesty she had demanded. It was not the tidy confession she might have wanted. It was rougher, human, and edged with complications. Gabriel did not try to dress his silence as cunning. He admitted it was cowardice, a protection that privileged his daughter's safety above another person's right to know. There was a hard, honest grief in the admission. Marina listened, and though his words did not soothe, they did show something like compass. "I have been paying things," he said finally, "anonymously at first. Then I thought if a marriage could quiet the calls, make people stop pressing, maybe I could make a home for Alice without the vultures. I miscalculated. I thought I could control it all. I thought I was buying time for you to choose. I thought I was doing the right thing. Did you ever imagine I'd say yes for any other reason than to save my family?" Marina asked. "Did you imagine I'd become a quiet bride to solve a ledger?" "No," he whispered. "I didn't imagine. I misled myself into thinking I'd given you an option by building a path that would close their mouths. I'm sorry." The word came from a place too deep for rhetoric. It had the weight of an apology that had been rehearsed in private and then stripped down to its bare bones. She left that night again, not because she wanted to spite him, but because she needed air that wasn't saturated in justifications. Walking felt like rearranging the furniture inside her chest. The receipts and the envelope provided facts she could show to the world, but they did not return the agency that had been negotiated without her voice. She loved the child in that house with a stubborn tenderness she did not always name, and the knowledge of Gabriel's wealth complicated rather than simplified that love. Time passed in the small, slow increments that grief and thought require. Gabriel did not perform grandiose gestures. He did not send messages to the press or buy advertisements proclaiming his explanations. He paid visits to her father's house, not as a march of triumph, but as a quiet presence, bringing vegetables, speaking less than he listened. He left envelopes under blinds with receipts for mortgage payments. He paid the debts owed to small businesses in the neighborhood, doing it with a clerk's modesty so as to avoid fanfare. He set up a fund for Alice that required signatures from both parents to access for non-essentials. He arranged school scholarships for neighborhood kids, in the kind of careful way that read like someone paying attention. Marina watched these actions at a distance at first. There was a difference between money being applied to problems and money being wielded as a substitute for explanation. The receipts mattered, and so did the intent. He had been acting in the shadows. The receipts proved his care, but they did not prove his right to decide for her. When she came to see him, it was on a rainy afternoon, when Don Alcantara's cough had returned and she needed someone to drive her to the clinic. Gabriel arrived with an umbrella and sat in the waiting room with such patient stillness that she almost cried. He did not ask for anything. He simply was present. Being around him felt like stepping into a current that had its own rules. Sometimes those rules were tender and protective. Sometimes they were silent and hollowed out. "Why didn't you tell me about Alice's fund?" she asked as they sat in the car without starting the engine. Rain made the street a ribbon of silver. "Why keep everything in the dark? I wanted her to have a life before the world decided what she was," he said. "But there are other reasons I'm ashamed of. My mother—" He stopped, and the name caught like an old bruise. "My family has a history. When money enters a child's life, the danger is people pretending to love what's human for what they can inherit. I wanted to prevent that. I chose secrecy because secrecy felt safer than exposure." Marina watched him. The explanation nested truths she could understand and reasons she could not agree with. "You made a lot of decisions for a child," she said, "and you made one for me." "I know," he said. "I know I have to live with that. I don't deserve forgiveness. I only ask for the chance to earn your trust without hiding. I will be transparent. I will let you see the accounts. I will answer questions until you are tired of asking them. And if you walk away, I'll accept it." Those were not empty promises. He knew that promises alone did not stitch up the layers of damage. He began to invite her to see things, small, concrete steps rather than press-worthy statements. He showed her a ledger that recorded every anonymous payment he'd arranged, with dates and amounts and vendors. He displayed wire transfers to the creditor who had been after her father, and a list of the anonymous funds that had paid for medical bills and school fees for neighborhood kids. He introduced her by name to Sophia, and to a woman who ran the community center he had funded, who spoke of him not with glamour, but with the weary gratitude of someone who had been given a roof for winter. Marina absorbed proof like someone reading an unfamiliar language. The receipts bent the world into a new geometry. The arranged marriage had not been funded simply by him, but had been surrounded by acts of quiet service. The knowledge softened the sharp edge of betrayal, but did not dull it. She had not been consulted. She had been used, even if the use had been wrapped in intentions that had some claim to care. Slowly, and on her terms, the distance between them shrank. He did not ask for instant forgiveness. He accepted the hostility and the silence. Where she wanted honesty, he laid open accounts. Where she demanded agency, he stepped back and let her make decisions. He made a point of attending parent-teacher conferences for Alice, with Marina present, and insisted on equal voice when decisions were made about the child's schooling. He stopped excluding himself from family conversations that touched her life. He stopped making suggestions that landed like nets and began to ask questions that left room for her to answer. There were moments of tenderness that felt like restitution because they were not offered as payment but as presence. Once, On a night when the sky had the flat shine of an approaching storm, Gabriel took Marina's hands and said, "I cannot undo the ledger, but I can refuse to write future debts in silence." His voice was steady. "I will be the man who tells you what he thinks, not the one who devises plans behind closed doors." She challenged him, often with the sure, practical fury of someone who had been rearranged without consent. "If this is about safety," she said one night, "then safety mustn't start with silences. Safety is also being heard. If you wanted to protect Alice, you could have told me, and we could have made plans together." He listened, and then he acted. He invited her to a meeting where they would talk to a solicitor together, an effort to make decisions communal rather than unilateral. He agreed to an account where both their names were on the signature line for major expenditures. He allowed her to see the trust documents he'd set up for Alice, and he promised that no decision regarding the child's future would be made without their conversation. These were legal gestures, bureaucratic in their language, but they were also a form of respect that had been previously withheld. Their reconciliation did not happen overnight. There were fits in the fabric, days when Marina recoiled from a touch that had once felt like a hand on her shoulder, nights when she lay awake thinking of signatures. But there were also small stitches, a shared laugh while assembling a toy for Alice, a moment of tenderness when he braided the child's hair for school, the quiet during which they read a picture book together and let its silly rhymes stitch them into a private seam. The real test came not in quiet rooms, but in public. Donna Teresa, for all her hard victories, kept touching the subject like something that still made her eyes glitter with success. The neighborhood gossip thinned and thickened in waves, but there were questions looming like unwashed dishes. Gabriel knew that if anything would either make or break the fragile equilibrium between them, it would be a public reckoning. He invited Marina to a dinner at his aunt's house, a prescriptive, carefully curated space where the Tavares family met sometimes, and where his mother, Donna Lucia, still passed judgment, with the quietness of a matriarch who had seen too much. Marina considered declining. To go back into that room felt like a return to an arena where she had once been a pawn. But Gabriel asked, not with the weight of command, but with the steadiness of a man who had accepted responsibility. "You don't have to say anything," he told her as they dressed, "but I need my family to see you as you are, not as a story." At the dinner, the air smelled like roast and citrus. The table was long, full of polite chit-chat and courtly defense. Donna Teresa arrived with her smile tuned to triumph. She sat like someone who expected applause. There were distant cousins with the kind of lined faces that the family judged as useful, and uncles who sprinkled remarks into the air like salt. Gabriel spoke first, without fanfare. He asked for a moment of attention. The room bent toward him as though it were a habit. "I want to say something to my family," he began. "I want to speak about the truth." He told them not about ledgers or about bank accounts, but about choices. He described Alice with the kind of affectionate detail that made everyone there pay attention to the child sitting between them, her habit of placing 2 carrots on each plate, the way she drew the world in crayon. He spoke of being scared when he had been alone with responsibilities that seemed taller than his shoulders. He spoke about the necessity of protecting a child's life from those who would see potential profit before potential person. When he got to the part about Marina, his voice tightened, not a salesman's voice, but that of someone bearing confession. Marina signed papers at the registry because she felt she had no other option to save her family, he said slowly. That choice was offered to her, and it broke me that she felt forced. I suggested it, and for that I am sorry. I did not intend to use her. I intended to quiet demands. I intended to buy time. I did not intend to deceive her as a way to own a conscience. There was a hush after his words. Members of the family shifted, eyes moving like tides. Donna Teresa's face stayed controlled, but something behind her eyes cracked. She had always believed in outcomes. She had not considered the cost of achieving them. Gabriel continued, I have resources. I use them modestly because Alice's life matters more to me than the way our wealth is displayed. But modesty is not an excuse for secrecy. If I have failed someone I love by keeping the truth from her, I must correct that. I stand here tonight to say that I stand behind Marina. She will not be dismissed by rumor or by old-fashioned judgments. She has a right to dignity. The room stilled. There were low murmurings of disapproval and of shock. Donna Teresa's jaw worked. Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet and thin. She started. She looked at Marina, then at Gabriel, then at the child in his lap. There was a pause, long enough for everyone to feel like an intimate had happened before an audience. I'm sorry, Marina, Donna Teresa said, the words foreign on her tongue. I saw only the ledger, only the solution. I did not see you as a person with rights. I thought in equations. I thought a name on paper would fix things. Her hands trembled. She had been strong for many years, but a kind of contrition loosened the armor. If you forgive me, I will begin again, and I will try to see better. It was not an immediate absolution. Forgiveness is not something given as a novelty. But Donna Teresa's apology rearranged something in the room, a warmth of possibility where there had been cold judgment. The relatives shifted, some apologetic, some stiff, with the loss of scandal's fuel. Marina listened. The words did not heal the ledger, but they cleared space for a conversation. Gabriel stood and took her hand in a way that made both of them visible. He reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. It was not ostentatious or staged. Inside rested a simple ring, an unembellished band that reflected light in a modest way, like someone who had chosen durability over dazzle. "Marina," he said, without the theatrics meant to overwhelm, "I asked you to be something you did not have the right to accept or decline. You deserved better than a suggestion from a man who thought he was saving a child by hiding the truth. I can't take back what I asked. I can only ask now with my eyes open, without using you as a bridge for anything. Will you marry me truly if you want to, with your consent, your space and your voice?" For a second, Marina only heard the rush of her own blood. The ring was not an attempt to buy her favor, because the action that had led to its offering had already shown the cost of purchases disguised as protection. This ring was a request, plain and honest, extended in view of people who had once been ready to sell her like an invoice. She thought of the life she had been building in small stitches, the job where she had found a steady hand, the evenings when Alice had crawled into bed and whispered about unicorns, the nights sitting with Gabriel when he had hesitated and then chosen transparency. She thought of the ledger and the choice she had been forced to make, and how that choice had now been reframed into something that asked for her consent. She felt the cool of the ring against her palm like a new possibility. "I won't say yes because you have money," she answered finally, the cadence of her voice deliberate. "I won't say yes because of what you can provide. I will say yes if what we become is built on truth, not on orchestrations made by other people's fears. I will say yes if you accept that some wounds need time and that I will not be hurried into forgiveness. And I will say yes if we become partners, equal, transparent, chosen." He closed the box and slid the ring on her finger with a care that felt almost sacred. "I will accept that," he said. "I promise to be transparent. I promise to let you ask anything and to answer. I promise to never decide for you again." The room, which moments before had been a field of competing loyalties, exhaled softly. Not everyone at the table applauded, not every look softened. But something shifted in the choreography of lives. Donna Teresa reached across the table, and with the haltingness of someone relearning humility, she touched Marina's hand like an alliance being formed. Alice, for her part, contentedly plucked at a napkin and then climbed into Marina's lap as if she had always belonged there. The child's small acceptance, unencumbered by money or pride, sealed something truer than words. After the dinner, the family did not disintegrate into applause and accolades. They drank tea and spoke of practical things, school schedules, names for the godparents who would teach Alice to swim. There were still difficult conversations about how the family would be involved, about how Donna Teresa could not undo her earlier stance, but could try to support Marina moving forward. Those conversations were real and messy and not fully resolved, but they were conversations instead of edicts. Life did not return to an uncomplicated bliss. There were still mornings when Marina woke with a fistful of doubts. There were evenings when an old rumor flared briefly and demanded public patience. The money altered their options. Renovations to the little house were made out of respect rather than as an attempted salve. Gabriel insisted they keep some smallness. He refused to bulldoze the home where memories had been tender, and they worked together to repaint the living room, choosing colors in quiet consultations. Marina resumed work at the office and later accepted a position coordinating outreach for the community center Gabriel had funded. It was a job that allowed her to use her administrative training and to engage with the neighborhood that had watched her so closely. Doing the work felt like a form of repair. She made decisions, signed papers, and in meetings she spoke with an authority that had been nearly erased by the event that had forced her into marriage. Gabriel supported her decisions without overshadowing them. He attended meetings when she asked and stayed home when she preferred to handle things alone. They built a new choreography of parenting. Gabriel shared the night feedings when Alice had fevers. He sat through recitals and painted party decorations with a seriousness that might have been comical if it were not so tender. Marina taught Alice to braid hair. Gabriel taught her to tie a knot. The child learned that families could be complicated and kind. She learned that adults could apologize and still be guardians. Once, as they sat on the couch under a blanket that had been stitched with exactly the kind of patches that reminded them of their separate pasts sewn into a present, Marina caught Gabriel's hand and squeezed it. "You did a terrible thing," she said. Not unkind, but honest. He let out a laugh that sounded like a small release. "I did," he admitted, "and you made me live with that. You were right to make me do better. And you made me live with other people's choices," Marina said. She smiled then, a quiet, private thing. "We both have damage. We both have mending to do," he said. They both knew the work would not end. Trust did not arrive full-formed. It was constructed from the mundane bricks of consistent presence, accountability, and apologies worn in. Sometimes a receipt would arrive that reminded Marina of the old secretiveness. Sometimes a relative would murmur a comment that brought the old shame bubbling like a remembered bruise. But there were new patterns, too. Conversations in the kitchen where they planned vacations like ordinary people, advice-seeking about school from a mother and father who could be honest about their fears. The way Alice would climb into their bed and take up both their spaces as if she had always meant to share them. The city that had watched them rearranged itself around a story that had been simpler before, a poor bride and a humble father. Now the headlines, the gossip, the neighborly questions had a new color. People who had once pointed a finger at the arrangement had to learn to soften their judgments. Those who judged silently had to adjust to a family that refused to be reduced to a single sentence. Years later, when the house's paint had been refreshed and the little unicorn blanket had a faded corner where Alice had loved it most, Marina would sometimes trace the faint indentations of the pen on the registry page with a finger. The memory of signing would not leave her, and she would not ask it to. It had been a wound, and wounds teach in ways scars sometimes do not. But she kept the ring on her finger, and inside it she could find the small proof of a promise he had kept in action rather than speech. She had not been forced into joy. She was not happy because money had erased everything. She had been offered something better, which was not to have everything bought for her, but to be chosen daily by a man who had learned the hard lesson that protection without permission could not be love. That was an understanding that kept her feet on the ground. On quiet mornings, with the sunlight pouring in and the kettle singing, she watched Gabriel make coffee the way he had from the first week he had become her husband. Bitter, strong, and always with an extra cup for the child who still ate toast cut into triangles. Sometimes he would look up from the counter and meet her eyes across a small room full of ordinary objects. The faded couch, the unicorn blanket, the stack of community center pamphlets. In those moments, the things they had fought for and about formed the architecture of a life they both had to repair and choose. He had been, in the eyes of the world for a while, a poor single dad. He had been that in the way he wore his clothes, in his choice of modest furniture, in the way he avoided the flashy life, but no one knew until later that he had been the millionaire who had paid their debts in secret, the man whose wealth had been bent toward quiet acts rather than display. More important than the money was the lesson he'd learned, that wealth meant little if it robbed others of agency. Marina had been forced to sign a paper, but she was not forced to forgive. She chose, in time and with clear-eyed demands, to become part of a family that knew what it meant to be transparent. She and Gabriel rewrote the terms of their relationship with clauses not of contract, but of mutual respect. Alice grew up between stories of thrift store unicorn blankets and private city foundations that funded playgrounds. She learned that people are complicated. She learned to forgive and to hold others accountable. The ledger remained a part of the past, a legal past that once dictated choices, but it no longer defined their lives. It had been a beginning that neither of them had chosen in the way that mattered. The end they built, if end there was not about a finality, but about an ongoing practice, choosing each other openly, sharing burdens publicly, and honoring that protection without permission is a theft, not a kindness. When asked by a neighbor years later, "Did you ever regret staying?" Marina would answer with a small, weary smile. "At first, yes," she would say. "It felt like betrayal. But then he learned to choose me, not decide for me. And I learned to hold my ground. We taught each other how to be partners." And when asked about the car, the crest on the building, the receipts under envelopes, she would say what mattered most. He was a poor single dad by the look of him, because he wanted the child to be a child. He was a millionaire by the reach of his hands. What no one knew was not the number in his bank, but the price he paid to learn how to love honestly. They kept the unicorn blanket, tattered and sweet, as a reminder that small things often hold more truth than big ones. They kept the receipts in a file labeled for history and not for triumph. They taught Alice to ask questions, to seek answers, and to draw her life in colors that included rich shadows and bright, honest light. In the end, the signature that had once felt like a sentence settled into the ledger of a life that had been rewritten by truth, not by secret ledgers. The marriage that had begun as an arrangement became, through confession and work, a choice. The child who had watched them through all the changes slept safe, with two parents who had learned, imperfectly, to build family the way you would build anything that matters, with time, with honesty, and with hands willing to do the work.